Bueno, primero que todo, quiero agradecer a los organizadores del Panorama actual de las Ciencias Atmosféricas de la UNAM y en especial al profesor David Adams por invitarme, y también como parte de UC Nexus, que integra a gente de los Estados Unidos y de México. Bueno, muchísimas gracias. Ahora voy a irme al inglés. Bueno. Okay, so I'm going to talk about the role of shallow groundwater and land-atmosphere interactions in southern South America. And I'd like to acknowledge Alejandro Martinez, who's my former PhD student and currently at the Universidad de Antioquia in Medellín, Colombia. Okay, so why study land-atmosphere interactions? So I'm going to give a quote from Sonoridad Mineral 2010. So, similar to the oceans, which can store heat and induce persistence of memory in the climate system, the land also represents a storage of water. So when it rains, the land can store it and then later re-evaporates at a later time. So it also is associated with these persistence features. So what I'm showing here is probably the iconic map of land-atmosphere interactions. This is by Coster et al. And published in Science, cited almost 1,000 times. So what you're seeing here is the coupling between the soil moisture and precipitation in June, July, August. So primarily you'll see these hotspot regions where the soil moisture seems to be coupled to precipitation. Okay, and so this, like the North American monsoon, which a lot of people are studying, and the Great Plains of the United States, as well as other regions of the world. And so if you read carefully these series of papers, this is using a lot of different models to come up with this global picture. And if you look at them, one of the important things that they state is that you're kind of quantifying the impact of a relatively predictable state, which is deep soil moisture, that has significant inertia and memory, and how this affects the overlying atmosphere. Now, so deep soil moisture is kind of the key here, right? As you move further down the soil column, you're going to have timescales of interaction which are slower and slower until you get to the groundwater. None of these models that participated in the the first Glosse ensemble, have any representation of groundwater. So why are we interested in groundwater? Again, so the groundwater flows are relatively long, affecting the persistence of the hydrologic anomalies. And if you look at this, so I'm going to focus a lot on this image. This is kind of your traditional hydrologic cycle. But if you have a region with shallow groundwater, you can, first of all, reduce the moisture drainage, okay? So that as the moisture infiltrates down the soil column, the presence of this boundary can reduce the vertical flux. You can also have upward vertical flux through either capillary rise, or you can have access of it directly from the roots into the shallow groundwater. And there's one more thing, which is this lateral redistribution of shallow groundwater. Okay, so basically, if the vast majority, I would say 90% of the models coupled to the atmosphere only have a vertical component of interaction, but here you're having a lateral component of interaction deep in the soil column. Okay. So this is a really nice paper by Ying Fan, Reinfelder, published in Science in 2013. And what they did was that they mapped the water table. Okay, so basically, okay, this has two components. One is an observation, so thousands and thousands of observations throughout the globe, and the other one is a model. So they're combining the observations and model to come up with this global image of the water table. Any area that is in blue has the water table which is less than 2.5 meters. And this kind of 2 meter threshold is important because that's where most models have their roots. Okay, that's how deep the roots go. So this is something key. So basically, anything that's in blue, the vegetation could potentially have access to groundwater. And if you look at this over South America, there's a very large region that has shallow groundwater. Okay, and this is kind of a blow up on a region here in the Amazon because the model is at 30 arc seconds, so less than 1 kilometer resolution. So what's nice is that it resolves the local topography. So you have all these lateral flows of moisture that accumulate in the valleys here. Okay, so it's pretty nice how the topography is controlling groundwater flows. So in, again, these regions where the water table is shallow, this could potentially affect soil moisture. So first motivation is that in South America, there's broad regions of shallow groundwater. The second motivation is that the La Plata River Basin, one second, I'll show. This is the La Plata River Basin. This is the Amazon Basin. And this is La Plata down there. Okay, so the La Plata Basin shows a strong coupling between soil moisture and evaporation. So basically, what Sorensen and Menendez did in 2011 was that they did the same Coster experiments that I told you for June, July, August. So they did them for the Southern Hemisphere summer, December, January, February. Okay, so this is the time when you have strong coupling between the soil moisture and evaporation over this broad region in La Plata. And then they also calculated the coupling strength between soil moisture and precipitation. And they found these kind of small but some hot spot regions where they see that soil moisture seems to be controlling precipitation to some sense. Okay, so, but again, this is Southern Hemisphere summer, so in the Coster paper, you won't see a hot spot over South America because that's June, July, August. So, okay. So this is where we began our work in the La Plata Basin. And I'm just gonna, again, so this is the iconic map with the Andes mountain chain. And there's a very distinct cycle of precipitation. So what I'm showing you here is the map of the shades are precipitation in millimeters per day. Apologies for not putting that there. And the arrows are vertically integrated moisture fluxes for January and for July. Okay, so you have this very distinct intrusion of moisture, and that leads to precipitation all along the Amazon Basin and the South American Monsoon region, which is down here. Whereas in July, it's the dry season, very, very little precipitation over the entire region. Okay, and here this is the ITCZ, Intertropical Convergence Zone, which you see migrates slightly. Okay. If any questions, please raise your hands, and I'll be glad to answer throughout the talk. Okay, so the first question that we tackled, this is a 3-part series. This is the first paper for Alejandro's PhD thesis. So the first question is, what is the origin of precipitation that falls within the La Plata River Basin? Where does the moisture come from? And we started off with this analytical model that I developed during my PhD, where you basically have this column of the atmosphere and you're following it in space and time. And you're able to, with the model, you can calculate the fraction of precipitable water that's collected along this trajectory, like a Lagrangian trajectory, okay? So this was the model that I developed, and what Alejandro did was that he extended it so that we could actually figure out exactly from how much, okay, so let's imagine that the water precipitates in this pixel. We have a back trajectory from this column that's going along this trajectory, and we can figure out how much of the precipitation that falls in this pixel originates from each of these subregions, A1, A2, A3, A4, okay? And so this is the extended DRM. I'm calling it the DRM. I don't have the name. this dynamic recycling model, the DRM. And what he did was that he said, okay, we're going to apply this model over over the entire South American continent, a period of 33 years, and the model is run at a daily temporal resolution. We divide the region into both oceanic and terrestrial sources, so we're going to calculate for each one of these different regions how much it contributes to precipitation within the La Plata River Basin here. As input to the model, we're using ERA interim data, and we get evapotranspiration, precipitable water, integrated vertical moisture transport, and precipitation. So those are the inputs to the model. And as an output, we get these daily maps that show us the amount of precipitation that you get out of each of these regions. So here I'm showing for the southern Amazon region how much of the precipitation within each of these pixels comes from the southern Amazon. Okay? So the colors, of course, it's very dynamic. So basically we do this for every single region. Okay? Is that clear? So every one of these colors means what percentage of the precip that falls here in this pixel comes from the southern Amazon. Okay? Okay. So Alejandro did this for all of the regions that I showed here. And something that was very important to our main finding was that essentially 63% of the total precipitation that falls within the La Plata River Basin comes from terrestrial origin, okay? So huge fraction of the water that falls in this basin, much more than half, where 24% comes from the Amazon. So this is only the southern Amazon, but 24 comes from the entire Amazon basin. Another 24 comes from the La Plata Basin itself, so recycling within this region, so water that evaporates and then falls. Pardon, yes. What is the time scale that you are? The output comes at the daily time scale, but the input is actually 6 hourly. That's a good question. So we get 6 hourly data and output daily data. Okay. And so, so we have the Amazon contributing 24, La Plata 24%, other terrestrial regions, I think that says 15, and the rest is oceanic, okay? And so I want you to see this feature, which is a semi-permanent feature of the atmosphere in South America, which is the South American low-level jet, which is right here. And so this is a region of intense winds that kind of funnels in east of the Andes. And this feature is what allows so much of the moisture from this Amazon region to come into the mid-latitude. So this is a very important moisture conduit for the atmosphere, for the La Plata.
What's the altitude of that jet?
It's a low-level jet. So I think below 1.5 kilometers, but I'll need to double check. It's low level. Yeah. Okay, and so what I'm showing here is the seasonal cycle. So of course this is daily, 33 years, but we're aggregating this so that we can get a climatological seasonal cycle. So precipitation, as you saw before, peaks in December, January, dry season, June, July. Green is evapotranspiration. The black is the total of all terrestrial regions, and then over here you see all of the subregions where we calculate how much each of these contributes to precipitation over La Plata. Okay? Yes.
Ahí es que no se oye la traducción.
En el porcentaje de fuentes de la humedad, ¿qué tan ciertos son esos números? Sobre todo porque estos resultados, si bien entendido, es de era interim, y es un modelo atmosférico forzado por
Correcto.
las temperaturas del mar. Sin embargo, los flujos de humedad son muy diferentes cuando uno usa un modelo acoplado.
Okay. So basically, what is the uncertainty of these estimates given that this is a model product? So this is, it is coupled. So ERA interim does have a land component. So you do have estimates of evapotranspiration. How good that is?
Sí, pero
Yo me refiero al acoplamiento con los océanos. Era interior, no es acoplado un océano.
No.
Y los flujos de humedad son muy diferentes cuando se le permite al modelo atmosférico interactuar con un modelo oceánico y con un modelo de suelo. Entonces ahí la proporción de esos flujos de humedad probablemente cambie.
Podrían cambiar. Yes. So basically, it's true, but it's also, remember that it's a reanalysis product. So you have observations that are being assimilated into the model. So it's true that there's not like the full, like a full GCM where you have the ocean working, but you do have the observations that are kind of limiting the constraining the dynamics and the thermodynamics. Yes, Ben.
Did you specify, or did you say how long do you follow backwards or longitude?
Yes, so it's either until it exits the boundary, or I want to say 10 days, but it's either or. So, yeah. Okay. This is actually the El Nino. So basically, we also did some analysis of how this changes during El Nino or La Nina conditions. And the shading is precipitable water anomaly. So blue means more precipitable water and red means less precipitable water. And what we find is that during El Nino, we have more water vapor and precipitation. And you have a very strong flow that's coming from the north and west. So you have kind of this intensification of moisture that's coming from the Amazon into the La Plata. Whereas during La Nina, you have less water vapor, you have weaker flows. These are anomalies, so that's why they look in the other direction. And this increases recycling, but it's still pretty dry. The recycling does not compensate for all these moisture that's coming from the Amazon. Okay, so that was the motivation. And what we wanted to know now was, okay, we're saying that these terrestrial fluxes are very important for the region. So what happens, what is the effect of a groundwater component on the simulation of both soil moisture and evapotranspiration? And this is kind of the offline where we're forcing a land surface model with ERA interim atmospheric forcing. And then we have the full coupled, like what you were saying, the full coupled system, but only for the terrestrial part, where you have, where we're trying to figure out what is the effect of this kind of very slow soil moisture reservoir on precipitation. Okay? So uncoupled and coupled mode. Okay, so that's the first one. So we're going to use two models for the uncoupled mode. The first one is the Miguez, Macho, and Fan groundwater scheme, which was the same scheme that was used for the science paper. We actually use it for both the offline and online simulations. And in this model, we have 14 soil layers to a depth of 4 meters. We have our water table, and it's a dynamic water table, so it moves in time. And we have, this is kind of important, we have vertically integrated lateral groundwater movement. So it simulates the lateral redistribution of groundwater. And it neglects local complexity and human influence.
It's only 4 meters.
The soil is 4 meters in depth, yeah. And so we're also comparing this with the simple groundwater model by Nino et al. And it's slightly different. It has an unconfined aquifer below the result layers, and we also did it to 4 meters in depth. And the discharge is parameterized using this top model concept, which is topography driven. So lateral flow is not explicitly resolved, but we wanted to compare the two of them. However, in this talk, I'm just going to focus on the previous, on the Miguez Macho and Fan scheme, so I'm not going to show results from this. Okay, so the simulations use the NOAA MP model with and without groundwater schemes, and so anything that has FD means free drainage, and GW is with groundwater with the Miguez Macho and Fan scheme. We're going to run it at a resolution of 20 kilometers. This is important. We have a 30-year-long simulation to initialize. Okay, so again, these are very slow, dynamic systems, so you need a long time to get the system to equilibrium. So this is a 30-year initialization, and I'm going to show results from the 10-year period, 2004 to 2013. We're forcing it with ERA interim, precipitation, and winds, temperature, and radiation. Okay, so what I'm showing here is the terrestrial water storage, where the way that it's simulated with the free drainage and with the groundwater simulations. So the water storage includes all the moisture in the soil, the canopy, and in this case, the groundwater. And these are GRACE satellite observations. So what we find is that to a first cut, it seems that the groundwater model is more closely simulating the spatial distribution of groundwater, of terrestrial water storage than the free drainage. Oh, sorry, and this is April, so the end of the wet season, and October, the end of the dry season, and beginning of the wet season. Yes.
¿Cómo es que le hace un satélite para saber el agua del...
Oh gosh, okay. You got me in that one. I know it's gravimetric measurements, but to be honest with you, I don't know the details. Yeah.
Anomaly of gravity.
Anomaly, and these are all anomalies. Yes. So whatever you interpret with the anomaly of the gravity field. Yes. Okay. Thank you. Okay. And so for the South American this is a box over the South American monsoon region, and the GRACE is in black, the groundwater scheme is in blue, and the free drainage and the simple groundwater model is in red and green. And what we see is that in terms of the timing of the peak of water storage, the groundwater scheme does seem to be improving with respect to observations. However, when we get to the upper La Plata, we have issues. This is GRACE, and these are all the models. So the models are not really capturing the terrestrial water storage in GRACE as well as they do for the monsoon. And part of it, I know, is because of inundation in this region. So there's no explicit representation of inundation in the NOAA MP model. So we're having issues with the hydrology. This is a hydrologically very complex region. Okay, so in terms of the water depth, this is the map of the October water table depth with ranges between 3 and 30 meters over the region. We are overestimating the depth with respect to the Fan et al. Papers, and this is largely a result of the 20-kilometer grid that we're using. So this is a function of resolution. However, when we look at, so what I'm showing in all of these plots are going to be very similar. This is groundwater minus free drainage, and in this case it's divided by free drainage, so the fractional change when you use the groundwater scheme. And what we see is that in regions where you have shallow groundwater, which would be any of this blue, green, yellow areas, you have a significant increase in the soil moisture. So all of these regions in blue are regions where the groundwater is impacting the soil moisture, upper level soil moisture, the shallow soil moisture. With changes of between 5 and 20% over the LPD. So these two boxes are going to be the La Plata Basin, South American monsoon, and the Southern Amazon. Okay. Okay. So what we find is that when we compare the free drainage, which is red, with the groundwater, it's almost like a delta change. We're always, throughout the season, the groundwater is simulating more soil moisture in these regions. This is the lower La Plata. So you also see the same, just kind of bias in the simulations, okay? But always positive. So you're always going to increase the soil moisture in those regions. Now, I don't know how good you can see this map from the back, but this is soil moisture, and this is evapotranspiration. Okay? January, April, July, October. And so for the soil moisture, it's the same kind of idea that anywhere you have shallow groundwater, you're going to have an increase in your soil moisture. But for the ET, you see the differences here, that you have increases in ET, but not in the northwestern part of the domain. So all of this, even though you have more soil moisture here, you don't have as much a response in ET. Because ET is radiation limited in these regions, in this part of the continent, whereas it's water limited in these parts. Okay? So the response of evapotranspiration, is associated to soil moisture, but not over the entire continent. Okay. So now let's go to, This is one more experiment that we did where we compared the 20 kilometer versus a 5 kilometer resolution. This is only 4-year simulations, no spin-up. So all we wanted to do was see how does the resolution affect this simulation. So this is the groundwater with a 20 kilometer, and this is the groundwater depth with a 5 kilometer resolution. So what do you see? Look at all these regions. Look at this region here, okay, versus this. All the topography is, these topographic complexity is having the lateral movement of the groundwater is accumulating in the valleys, like here. So we have much more complex groundwater flows. That's something that looks like this, which would only be simulated at the 20 kilometer scale. Okay? So it's a function of resolution.
Algo que no me queda muy claro es, por ejemplo, cuando el agua está a mayor profundidad, de píxel a píxel debe haber diferencias de suelo también.
Correcto.
Y por lo tanto, las escalas de tiempo asociadas a que esa agua profunda, llamémosle así, pueda estar disponible en la superficie, deberían de ser función del suelo. ¿Ese modelo considera todo este tipo de cosas?
Sí, does the model take into account the conditions of the soil for the movement of water, both in the saturated and unsaturated zone? And it does. Yeah, it does. It does include the soil types. So if you're at a 20 kilometer resolution, which this is changes in evapotranspiration at the 20 kilometers, you would simulate, let's say for these regions, much less evapotranspiration change than over here if you go to the 5 kilometer resolution. Okay? So you have all these regions that now are popping up in the ET map, particularly in the regions of more complex terrain. And so if you have this this box over the southern Amazon, you have this spike in the change in ET. That would be the blue, and the red would be at the 20 kilometers. Okay, so for a region like the Amazon, you really need to get to a high-res model, okay, or you won't be really able to capture these interactions. However, for the La Plata, we're okay. At the 20 kilometer resolution, it's reasonable. The simulation is very reasonable. Okay? So with that in mind, 20 kilometer resolution, we go to the fully coupled system. There have been only a handful of studies that have looked at how groundwater impacts precipitation. These are some, they're all over North America. This is by Anya, another one is by Jen et al., Barlage. And the bottom line of these studies that they've done over North America is that there seems to be some signal in the west, But over the rest of the region, it's very heterogeneous, so not much of a clear signal. And again, this Barlage paper also finds negligible differences in precipitation with groundwater schemes. So over North America, this doesn't seem to be a big deal. So we go to South America using the WRF model, NOAA-MP, with and without Dominguez Macho and Fan groundwater scheme. This is a 4-year time period, 2006 to the end of 2009, 20 kilometer. These are the physical parameterizations. The full domain of the WRF simulations. So again, no oceanic coupling. Okay, so the first thing was, does the coupled model behave in a similar way as the offline, as the uncoupled system? And what we find is that it does. So when you look at changes in soil moisture, you have that the regions where the groundwater is shallow, you have an increase in the soil moisture all along here. And the changes in ET follow these same regions except for the northern part of the domain, which is more radiation limited. So basically, this was a sanity check, right? That the coupled model is isolating the effect of the groundwater and not just the noise of the coupled simulations, of the coupled system. But now we can get into other variables. These changes in evapotranspiration then lead to decreases in 2-meter temperature over a large part of the La Plata and Amazon. And we have increases. So here the blue are increases in specific 2-meter specific humidity over a large part of this region. However, the signal is not that great. Sorry, this is October, November, December. So we have all these increases in specific humidity. And so that leads to changes in the lower atmosphere, right? So we have significant decreases in the lifting condensation level throughout this area. And you also have decreases in the boundary layer height. So in terms of how this affects precipitation, it's kind of these are kind of competing mechanisms where this kind of increase the probability of precipitation, this would decrease it. Okay, so there's these two things going on in terms of the thermodynamics. And this is essentially showing the same thing. This is over the upper La Plata basin and the lower La Plata basin where you have lower level increase in relative humidity and in moist static energy. So you're decreasing the temperature, but you're still increasing the moist static energy at lower levels, and at upper levels there's almost no change. Okay, so I guess you can imagine where I'm going to here, right? So the changes in the groundwater do affect Cape. So you have this red is increase in Cape throughout this broad region. And that affects convective precipitation, okay? So with more Cape, you're increasing the convective precipitation throughout this region. And when we're looking at the non-convective component, it's very noisy. There's not a great signal as you have seen with the other plots. However, you do see an increase here in the southern part of the domain with the non-convective component. So basically, the moisture, So the moisture goes like this, and it's affecting non-convective precipitation here, but convective precipitation over these regions. Yes, Ben?
I think I missed it, but you're running the simulation at a resolution with parameterized convection?
Yes, parameterized convection came first. So, yeah. Yeah, because it's 20 kilometer resolution. Yeah. So in this region, so you have more convective over here, but more non-convective here. So when you add these two together, the convective and the non-convective, you get the full signal of precipitation. So this is the free drainage precipitation, October, November, December, with your big monsoon moisture coming in here. The changes in total rain and total precipitation are here. So it's very noisy, right? When you get to the land surface, it's a very clean signal, but when you get to higher and higher levels, you start getting a lot of noise. Okay. So here you have the fractional change, where you do see very significant fractional change in precipitation in the lower La Plata. So some regions on the order of 30%. So that's very significant, actually. Okay, so basically what I'm doing here is regional averages over the southern La Plata. I'm showing evapotranspiration for the free drainage and for the groundwater, and precipitation for the free drainage and the groundwater. So the first thing is, it's always more. When you put the groundwater into the model, you get a generalized increase in both evapotranspiration and precipitation over, this is the southern La Plata, okay? So unlike the United States, where the signal was very, very noisy, this is a very clean signal where the groundwater is always increasing evapotranspiration and precipitation. This is just groundwater minus free drainage in ET and in precipitation here. And this is the percentages. So I'm going to blow up this last one. So what we find is that the increase in precipitation is 30 to 120% of the extra ET. Okay? So you're increasing ET, but precipitation is increasing a lot. So from our previous work, if you were thinking only of moisture sources and recycling, we would expect like a 30 to 40% increase in precipitation. But look, some years the change in precip is higher than the change in ET. Okay? So what this is telling us is that this is not just a moisture source change, and that this was kind of my story with the CAPE and the lifting condensation level and moist static energy, that the changes in the land surface are affecting these whole thermodynamics. And the extra precip is coming not only from direct recycling, but from the effects of ET on the stability of the local and upstream atmosphere. Okay? So it's these two mechanisms together. Okay, and what I'm showing here are the biases in temperature and precipitation between our free drainage model and ERA interim, so kind of observations. And this is, what I'm showing here is kind of typical of all regional climate models over this region, that there's a big warm bias in the upper La Plata basin, and there's also a dry bias here. So there's a dry bias here. So the models are too warm and don't rain enough in general. When we add the groundwater, we alleviate a little bit this dry bias, the warm bias, but we're definitely, the signal, we slightly alleviate the dry bias, but definitely not enough. So what this is telling us is that it's not, groundwater is not going to fix the problems in this region, fix all problems. Yes, George?
But TRIM may underestimate the light precipitation in that region too.
The what?
The light precipitation rates perhaps underestimated in TRIM, and I was wondering if you verified against station data, for instance.
No, we have not compared. Okay, yeah, okay. No, we haven't.
It may not be as bad as it shows.
As the TRIM, okay. Well, I think this is now working with Chris and people in Illinois. I tend to think this region, most of the precip, 90% of it, 80 to 90% comes from mesoscale convective systems that propagate. So I think this is basically this is not only hydrology, right? So.
Yeah, this gets to my overarching comment here is that we're looking at all of this in the context of a regional atmospheric model simulation with a 20-kilometer grid spacing.
Yeah.
And so the key region of interest here is the predominant meteorological mechanism for precipitation generation or organized mesoscale convective systems.
Yeah.
Where what would be very interesting in reference to George's comment is to really plot in a very detailed way what are the differences between various sources of observed precipitation, trend, other sources, for example, chirps, that would incorporate gauge-based sources or go to the gauges themselves.
So there's a whole, like, here,
right.
There's nothing.
I realize that you might be in a data challenge region.
Yeah.
But you've got to eventually, and this is not necessarily a criticism, I think this is just the stage of where the work is at, but I think you eventually got to move toward a convective permitting simulation where you have the appropriate physical representation of convective structures that can couple with all of the good work you're doing in improving the land surface processes.
Yes. Oh, I completely agree. Yeah, it's critical, and we are moving that way. But yeah, those are very expensive, right? So when you start getting here, we're doing this with WRF and with WRF Hydro to try to get at these very high res simulations, because that's the problem. So precip is accumulating here and then not propagating in the way it should be. So definitely, high resolution is definitely the way to go. Did I finish? No. Okay, so this is just the concluding slide. So we have a groundwater, an offline simulation with groundwater, where we find that soil moisture in the root zone increases where water table is shallow. So basically, if you're not including this groundwater, you're probably underestimating both soil moisture and ET fluxes, particularly over the La Plata basin. And then for me, this was a very interesting result with the higher horizontal resolution, which we thought of it like analogous to the convection, like kind of that when you get to smaller and smaller scales, new things start kind of popping up physically that you just cannot represent at the larger scale. When we get to the fully coupled system, we find first that the results with the coupled and uncoupled are consistent. So basically we're kind of extracting the signal that we wanted to extract. And that the groundwater scheme induces increase in precipitation during this October, November, December primarily due to extra moisture and instability. So these two mechanisms combine. And what's interesting also is that this is kind of the first geographical region where this has shown in a consistent way. So this seems like this is quite a unique region in the globe to look at these things. And with that, I leave it for questions.